Hello and welcome to your advanced Java programming course. And in this video I'm going to be showing you how I wrote the code for the project for section 1. Now before we begin programming, we first have to create our project. So let's click new project, Java application, and I'm going to call this one sort. Because that's what our program does, it sorts information. Now that we have created our project, we have to import the following assets. Import javax.swing.star. The reason we import these assets is because we're going to be asking the user to enter in certain information. So we need the right assets to create the right input boxes so the user can do so. Now we begin coding. The first thing we write are our string variables. So I'm going to show you what string variables I used in my program. First create string. Now we could create a long list of names, but I'm going to include them all in one line and give them values in case the user does not enter in something, so it has to use the blank values that are already stored. So string name equals, and let's give it blank, and then we'll have a last name for the last name that the user enters in. Also give it the value of blank. First for the result that comes first. So if our user's surname comes first in the list, it will be put in the first variable. And as such we'll create a second one as well. Second, and leave it as blank. And finally a temp variable. This temp variable is the variable we will compare the last name to. So we have to give it a particularly high value. In case the user's name begins with Z, we have to then call it ZZZ. I'll show you how this works later on. We now create an int variable, age, equals 0. Now you may be asking, why do we have to create an age variable if we're only going to be comparing strings? Technically we can just store our age into a string variable and it will still work. However, I prefer to put the age into an int variable in case we have to later use it in sorting. So we now create our for statement, which will repeat twice so we can enter in two users' values. So for int r equals 0, I is less than 2, I plus plus. We can also use a while loop, but then we have to create a count variable. This one has a built-in count variable, as you know, so we'll use this. We now create a while loop for the user to enter in the age. It will constantly repeat until the user has entered in an age that is 18 or above. So while age is less than 18. I have shown you this particular clause in our previous video where we discussed the project. Now we're going to have the user enter in their values. So we'll start with name, and then we'll start using our JOption pane .show input dialog. And as I mentioned in the discussion, we don't know whether the user will enter in capital letters, and the result should be in all caps. So we use the .to uppercase to solve this problem, as well as save us code later on. And inside our brackets for the show input dialog we'll say enter your first name and stop there. We now create a second variable, last, which will store the last name. Now I'm just going to copy this line of code, since it is essentially the same code, and change first to last. The user must now enter in their last name. We now create a third variable, the age variable. Now age is an integer, so we have to pass it before we use our JOption pane. So integer.pass int, and then JOption pane .show input dialog, enter in your age, and close with a semicolon. And that should do the while loop. Next, we create the if statements, which will be using our compare to method. We'll start by writing if temp, this is the variable that I mentioned earlier, dot compare to, and we'll use the variable last since we're sorting by last name, is greater than 0. That's our first if statement done. As you can see here, it will compare the temp variable and the last variable. And as you can tell from the capital Z's, that when you compare temp and the surname, it will be greater than 0. Meaning whatever happens in this if statement, it should place the result value in the first variable. So I'll show you that now. First, we've got to replace the temp variable for the next user. So temp equals last. Now this will then do is change the temp's value from ZZZ to the surname that was used before. We'll later, when the user enters in their second values, it will compare to this last surname. So that way it'll be able to sort it alphabetically using the compare to method. We next create second equals first. At the moment this does nothing, but let's suppose the user's first value's surname begins with a B, and the user's second value begins with an A. That means that A must come before B. Therefore it will run this part of the if statement again. So what will happen to the first values? Well, they'll be deleted and replaced. So we have to make sure they're not deleted and placed into the second variable, where it will be printed in the result. So second equals first. On the first run of the for loop, you'll notice that nothing will be stored in second, it'll be blank because we have yet to give first a value. Next, we now have to give our first variable a value of name.char at 0. This will store the first letter of the first name, which is what our result should look like. Next, we add a full stop and a space in between, and then we add the last name. And now finally, to complete the first result, we have to add the age. And to do that, we add a plus sign, open our quotations again, \n, so it will start a new line, and age. And that is it. Our first values will be stored like so. Next, we create an else. This is in case the user enters in a last name that comes after the last name they already entered, which means it will be put into the second variable. And we only have to create one more line, which is second equals, and we can copy this here since this is what we're going to be putting into the variable. And just like that, we have completed our if statements. Now before we close with the for loop, we have to make sure the age is returned to 0. The reason we do this is because our while loop will check the age variable, and if it's still higher than 18, well then it won't run and you'll only get one value. This may cause future error. And now we've completed the core part of the program. We only have to print the result. So we create our system out print line. Let's say first plus \n to start a new line plus second. And that should print our results perfectly. Now I'm going to use 2 runs to prove whether the program is working or not. Let's run the program. The first user's information I'm going to enter will be a last name that begins with B. So I'll type in Steve and let's say Bravo. And let's give an age that's below 18 so we can check whether our while loops runs properly. So we type in 12. It runs instantaneously, but how do we know that our information has been entered in properly? Well, we just have to write the information again. It won't ask us for more information if it didn't run properly. So let's just see if it works. So Steve, Bravo, and let's give it an age above 18, so 19. And it has asked us for information, which means our while loop worked correctly. And now the second information that I'm going to enter in is going to be a last name that begins with A. So let's type in Steve again, alpha. And the age, let's make it again less than 18, so 12. And it runs again. Our while loop is still performing correctly. So Steve alpha, and let's say 56. And alpha has been written before Bravo. There's the age, and it is the correct format. Everything is in capitals, the first letter of the first name. It is all working correctly. Now let's run the program again, and I'm going to start with alpha and then move on to Bravo. So let's type in a different name, so Richard alpha 34. And our second information, Steve Bravo 67. And as you can see, alpha is still printed before Bravo, and our program is working correctly. And that concludes our project for section 1. Compare your program to mine and see if there's any errors. All programs can be improved or code removed. So if you notice something in my code that is unnecessary, feel free to remove it and create a more efficient program. If you have a working program that has the same or less lines of code, then congratulations, you have completed the first project in the course. In the next video, I'll be concluding what we have learned in section 1.